Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host. So it's Sunday, the 15th of January. Catching up a little bit. I had a load that I picked up in Joplin, Missouri. So I delivered in Joplin, went down the street, picked up in Joplin, and brought that load out to the Walmart distribution center in North Platte, Nebraska. Of course, North Platte is the home of the Bailey Yard, the world's largest railroad classification yard, Union Pacific Yard. And when I say classification, what I mean is that they break apart and reform trains. So they sort cars there. That's what a classification yard does. So anyway, that's in North Platte. So I delivered there and I immediately got a pre-plan. So that was cool. Very cool. Got a pre-plan. I'm picking up tomorrow in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And that load is going to the City of Brotherly Love on Thursday. So it's not going to be on this week's paycheck, but that's okay because it pays quite well. It's a long trip, of course, but I think it pays, I don't know, I did the math. It pays close to $3 a mile. So I'm pleased with that, and that should be fun. I'm actually here in Schuyler, Nebraska. I think that's the town. Anyway, I'm here in Schuyler, Nebraska at the Loves. By the way, this Loves is off of US 30 and it's right next to a Cargill plant. And I've been here before. In fact, the last time I was here, though, I wasn't with Prime, I was at GP Transco. But I would see, Prime trucks come and go. But this Loves is never full. It's never full. Like I said, I've been here this is probably my third time. There's always parking here. It's what the heck time is it? It's around 8:30 in the evening. There's I would say a third of the spots are still available. And I don't think people will stay here all night, a lot of them either. So I mentioned it was January 15th, but before I get to that, I do want to mention that I have 1,845 subscribers, and that number is important because in 1845, that's when Fort Severn, located on the Severn River in Annapolis, Maryland, was taken over by the Navy, and the Naval Academy in its present location was born. There had been naval training for midshipmen before that, but it was kind of codified at Annapolis, and it's been there ever since. So and that happened under Navy Secretary George Bancroft, and when I was on the staff there, I had an office in Bancroft Hall, which is so flippin' big. It's the biggest dormitory, it's the biggest college dormitory, I think, anywhere. And it's called Mother B by the midshipmen because everything you could possibly need as a midshipman is there, right? You go downstairs, you kind of transition to a part of the facility called King Hall. That's where they eat. That's where all midshipmen, they sit for 3 meals a day. Simultaneously, there's vendors, there's the dry cleaning, the laundry, anything they really need is there. The dental clinic is in there. There's a sick call area, although now a lot of them would go over to Hospital Point. But yeah, Mother B. And my office used to be on, if anybody out there is is familiar with Bancroft Hall, my first office was on my first office was on 1-1, and then my company officer that year, because we split across T Court, because they were remodeling back then. And then my permanent office was on 4-4. So I was in 4th Battalion when I was a company chief there. Okay, so January 15th, a lot of cool, interesting things happened. In 1889, the Pemberton Medicine Company was incorporated. Now, you don't know any Pemberton Medicine Company products, but I bet you know all of the products of what the company became. Here's a clue. Yeah, Pemberton Medicine Company became the Coca-Cola Company. And I've said this many times, Diet Coke has medicinal purposes. In 1892, if you like to shoot hoop, this is a date that's important to you. James Naismith published the rules of basketball. And then whenever the NBA came around, like some of those rules, like traveling and stuff, went away. In 1919, so I never cease to be amazed by how people can die. Like the craziest ways that people die. And I'm not like, I don't have this morbid curiosity as, you know, like I'm not enamored with death. But I guess it just points up the randomness of life. So in 1919, a tank of molasses exploded in Boston, Massachusetts. And then there was this like flood of molasses, the Great Molasses Flood. 21 people were killed. And 150 were injured. And you know, I don't know, because this was in January, right? I don't know if the slow as molasses in January saying comes from that, but, and I'm guessing it might have been, you know, if it exploded, it might have been that the molasses was hot. And so it probably, I don't know if people were killed in a stampede or if, you know, there was a combination of things that happened, but I'm guessing that if this molasses was hot, it would have been a horrible death because it would have scalded people to death, but it would have been, unlike steam or hot water, it would not have evaporated quickly. It would have been horrible. It would have been just constant burning until they succumbed to their injuries. So that's crazy. And, you know, just, I mean, it's like you just never know, right? You know, I even heard of, and this happened probably maybe 35 years ago. There was an explosion at a gum plant. I think it was a Wrigley plant, and like hot gum, like chewing gum, like killed a couple of people. I mean, it's just, the stuff's crazy. And just on a more personal note, like the craziness of things, my dad, after my parents got divorced, my dad dated a woman down in Florida. She was driving down the road with her grandson, and a dump truck runs off, that's coming in the opposite direction, runs off the road to the right. But so she's not in danger from the dump truck, but the dump truck hits a concrete telephone pole. The pole falls right onto her moving car and kills her, and her grandson was uninjured. Fortunately, well, not fortunately, it just, my dad and her had already broken up at that point. But just, I mean, you just never know. On this date in 1947, one of the most celebrated murder cases in U.S. history certainly happened, the Black Dahlia killing. And you know, we always say the Black Dahlia. The woman's name was Elizabeth Short. And, you know, the killing was particularly gruesome. There's a guy named Steve Hodel, who was an LAPD detective. And a member of my family had mentioned him because my family member was, on the LAPD. And this guy surmised that his father, who was a surgeon, was actually the Black Dahlia killer. And he's written several books. Steve Hodel, Hodel, and I can't. His father's name was the same last name, but I can't remember his first name. And then, last but not least, on this date in 2001, Wikipedia went online, so that was kind of cool. Okay, so that's what happened. Somebody asked me to talk about descending hills, steep descents. And so I'm going to talk about it, but I will say, and I will refer you, I've done a couple of videos where I actually filmed going down a mountain. I did one where I went down over Fancy Gap, which is on I-77 going from Virginia into North Carolina. I think I did it on the southbound side. Well, yeah, it would have been the southbound side. And then I did another one going eastbound on I-80 down from the Donner Summit, from over Donner Pass. So you could kind of take a look at those, because I actually talked while I was doing them. But I did want to talk about a couple of things, because since I've done those videos, I've trained some people, and I kind of like, what I've realized is that people sometimes get in a pickle descending steep grades because they react instinctively. And if you're new to trucking, reacting instinctively to going down a hill in a truck is not usually going to be the best course of action, and I'll tell you why. What I mean when I say reacting instinctively is what happens when anybody who is a driver thinks a vehicle is moving too fast. Their immediate reaction is to what? Step on the brakes. However, stepping on the brakes is the wrong thing to do when you're descending a mountain in a loaded truck, or even probably an unloaded truck. Okay, so we all know that the way you control your speed, and let me just as an aside say, I don't look at speed as much as I look at trends of speed, and I try to teach this. So in other words, what the speed of the vehicle is going down the mountain is not as important to me as whether or not the driver has control of speed variations. In other words, you could come over the crest of a mountain or over a pass at 30 miles an hour. That's fine, and if you maintain that, that's fine too. But if you allow that speed to go very quickly to 60 miles an hour, right, and then start to take action, you're going to find that it's a lot harder to slow that truck down than if you control the gain of speed and maintain your speed going down. So what I try to teach people is first of all, and let me just also say I'm talking about Freightliners here, because I have driven international LTs, I've driven Volvos, I've driven a T600, a 2017 T600, which perversely had the Jake brake was actually a button on the dash. And I've never driven a Peterbilt. But what I'm talking about here is the Freightliner. So the first thing is, the easiest way to control your speed on a descent is to control your speed at the crest. Okay, it's a whole, because there are some steep descents that start out level. Like, you didn't actually climb to the point where you start descending. You were just on a level place, and then you drop into a valley. There are some places like that in Pennsylvania. And let me just say this about Pennsylvania real quick. I actually believe the most dangerous hill driving is on the East Coast. It's not in the Mountain West. Don't get me wrong. You can, bad things can happen out west. But my experience is that in places like Pennsylvania, West Virginia, parts of New England, parts of Virginia, the Shenandoah area, there are hills that are, especially on non-interstate roads, because also on interstates, by design, they have like maximum 6% grades. But there are U.S. highways that have like 10% grades. One of them is US 322 in Pennsylvania, and another is I think it's US 40 going down into Uniontown, Pennsylvania. They have enormously steep, like 10% grades. And the reason I bring up Pennsylvania is because Pennsylvania also makes you pull over. And there's one of these in West Virginia that I'll get to in a second. Pennsylvania makes you pull over and stop and then proceed down the grade. The other thing that you will find in Pennsylvania is extraordinarily low speed limits for commercial vehicles going down some of these very, very steep places. The other thing you need to know is the Pennsylvania State Police actually enforce those seemingly ridiculously low speeds. Okay, there is, I think on 322, I think the speed limit is maybe 15 or 20 at the most. 15 or 20. And, this doesn't happen every time, but I've been on there where I'm like in, 8th gear, the engine's just, wah, and I'm doing, 20, 21 miles an hour down this mountain, and some dude goes flying by me going 50. And then I've seen him pulled over. I don't necessarily agree with that great of a speed differential with other traffic, but, it's not my call. The other place that I've seen truckers get in trouble is on I-68 in West Virginia. There's a steep grade that goes down to Cheat, where it crosses Cheat Lake. You cross a bridge. And that speed limit's 50. So that's not super low, but before you start that descent, there is a mandatory truck pull-off that kind of looks like a weigh station, but they never weigh you. And it's a brake check area. Now, truth be told, you can go in there, drive right through, turn left, go back out to the exit that's right there, and then head on down at 50 miles an hour. If you blow that off, though, I've seen West Virginia state troopers pull trucks over for doing that. So in both Pennsylvania and West Virginia, if it says you got to stop, do it. And do the speed limit. Because every once in a while, they'll be out there. And, think about, there's one place that I can think of in PA, I think the speed limit is 10. I think it's 10. Can you imagine you're going 50 miles an hour when it says 20? Do you really want a ticket that says you were 30 over the speed limit? Like, that's crazy, right? Don't do it. Just go slow. Okay, so that's kind of like some strategy there. But let's get back to talking about the truck. So one thing that I recommend is putting yourself in cruise control. Say, okay, I feel like the safe speed to go down this mountain is, let's say you think the fastest you want to go is 50 miles an hour. Okay, let's say it's Parley's. Let's say 50 is the fastest you want to go down Parley's. And this is assuming dry pavement, yada, yada, right? It's not winter time. Okay, I want to go down at 50. I would set my cruise control around 43. Why? Because the cruise control is going to go to +5 and then the Jake brake is going to kick in. But here's why you can't be instinctive. You set it at 43. Now it's 44, 45, 48, right? At 48, the Jake brake's going to kick in. But guess what? It's probably not going to hold you right there. It's probably going to overshoot that. But if you put your foot on the brake, what happens? You disengage the cruise, which will also shut the Jake brake off. So now you went from having a lot of Jake brake to having none, and all you got is a service brake. And while you're figuring out that you just took all your drag off, you know, the truck is accelerating, okay? So don't do that. In fact, I am in the habit of almost not even using my feet, and I'll tell you why. Because then it's easier to not make that mistake. But in that situation, like I'm going down Parley's, okay? And this is the summit going down into Salt Lake City. It's long, there's some curves, and here's the other thing that you got to watch out for. There's a kind of a false flat. And what I mean by that is it's steep, then it levels out, and almost you feel like, man, I got to give it some gas or I'm just going to keep slowing down. Don't be fooled by that, because then it goes down again, okay? And then Parley's is dangerous because you kind of run out of space at the bottom, right? Like you got to do this. It doesn't just straighten out like when you come over the Front Range into Denver. But anyway, you got the Jake brake on. Now, if you're like, hey, the Jake brake with the cruise on, Jake brake on, Jake brake's engaged, it's not enough. Then what you do is you toggle down on your actual Jake brake, okay? That gives it additional braking power. Then, if you find that you still are going too fast, you're still gaining speed, right? Because you want to control the gain of speed, right? The actual speed is important, but it's even more important to recognize the trend. And so if you're like, hey, I'm uncomfortable with how fast I'm going. Now that you have the Jake brake itself engaged, not the cruise Jake, but the actual Jake, now you can touch the service brake, because now if you kick off the cruise control, you still have your Jake brake manually engaged. And then at that point you stab brake, right? I have a pressure gauge over here. I keep it in the corner of my eye. I usually run it at 20 pounds for 3 seconds. So I push hard enough to go up to 20 pounds. And by the way, if you panic and you push really too hard, that's when you start smoking your brakes. Because if you go up to 50 pounds, it'll actually slow you down pretty good, but it's going to start really heating your brakes up. So 20 pounds, right? And this is with, a decent weight load, 20 pounds of pressure on the pedal, on the brake pedal, 3 seconds, 1001, 1002, 1003. Count it out loud, right? Count it out loud, let it off. If it's still trending higher, do it again. 1001, 1002, that stab braking. That's going to slow you down. Now, the other thing is sometimes we want to speed up a little bit on that downgrade, but we have our Jake brake. Let's say you're at level 3. You came over the crest, you had your foot on the pedal, you put on level 3 so that when you let off the accelerator, it engages. What you want to do though at that point is you can let the Jake brake control. But let's say it's really, because by the way, in level 3 it will really clamp you down, and maybe you're feeling like I'm going a little too slow. So instead of, you got a couple options. One is you can disengage the Jake brake by simply pushing on the accelerator, but I prefer to just upshift. So I just paddle back, right? Like it's a paddle shifter. I paddle back 1. That'll take me from 9th or 8th, depending on how long the level 3 has been in place. It'll upshift me, reduce my RPM, right? Because you can still overspeed the engine with the Jake brake on, even, you know, going slow. If you're overspeeding, your options are to upshift or to brake. I usually prefer to upshift and see how that gear will hold me. If I then start gaining more speed than I want to, I have a couple of options, right? Again, because we upshifted, we're still in level 3, right? We're still all the way down. I can do one of two things. I can stab brake, or I can reset the Jake brake by simply tapping on the accelerator and letting off of it again, and then it'll get the full effect of the level 3, okay? The other option is if you're going a little bit faster than your cruise was set at, you could just put the cruise back on. It'll give you additional braking if you're at +5. So, you know, controlling your speed coming over the summit or coming from the high point, that's the easiest way to not panic yourself, right? But you have to be comfortable with all of these options, and you got to practice it. You know, I've heard prime instructors say, "Oh yeah, I don't let my students use the Jake brake or anything till they've been driving for like 20,000 miles." And I'm like, why? That's like saying I'm teaching you to fight fires, but I don't let you use water until we're halfway through training, right? I mean, the way I teach descending is I put a student in the right seat and I drive down a mountain and I talk, I say all the things, but I demonstrate it. And then once they're doing it, I'm sitting there right beside them. And I'll coach them. I'll be like, don't touch the brake. Don't touch the brake. You know, and you know, I teach them to see how far, you know, their following distance. Like, are you gaining on somebody? It doesn't matter if you're only going 26 miles an hour. If the guy in front of you is only doing 20, you're eventually going to run into him if you don't control your speed. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on. But like I said, the East Coast, those mountains are in many ways more challenging because a lot of them in West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Virginia, you go screaming down a mountain, guess what? It's not like out west where it just kind of, you know, runs out like a ski jump. No, you get down to the bottom of a lot of these, there's a bridge that's on a curve, or there's a curve, or, you know, and that's why, you know, I-80, I-77 through West Virginia and Virginia, I mean, those roads are not easy. Even there's a couple of spots on I-90 in Massachusetts. I mean, these aren't huge mountains, but it doesn't really matter, right? What matters is how steep they are and how much speed you get. It doesn't matter that you weren't on a 12,000 foot mountain and it was only 1,700 feet. If you crash, it's still going to be bad. So keep that in mind. One more thing about mountains. I have chains on this truck. The last time I touched them, other than brushing up against them when I get stuff out of my doghouse, out of my toolbox area, the last time I touched them is when I put them in there. Okay? This guy, I've driven I-70 in the winter, I-80 in the winter, I-90 in the winter, out west. I don't chain. Why? Because if you need chains to get up or down something, you don't belong on it. Okay? Don't, you know, wait. Right? And when I say wait, I don't care if it takes 6 hours or 6 days, right? I'm not chaining up. First of all, it's just an exercise in futility. I mean, it tears up your tires. You know, I don't do it. I'll wait, or I'll find an alternate route. But I'd rather just, you know, I had to go over Donner one time, and I was just like, I parked down there at the Loves in what's that town outside of Reno? It's just east of Reno. And I just was on my phone. I was like, when's 395 opening? When's 80 opening? When's 50 opening? I waited a few hours, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours. Then it opened. Over I went. I'm not going to, I'm like, if you got a chain, it's to get out of a situation that you didn't expect to be in. But to purposefully go into a situation where you got a chain, I'm sorry, I'm not that tough. I'm not that guy. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. And I will say the only way to really learn this is to do it with somebody that knows what they're doing. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.